Good morning and welcome to our Tuesday morning class. This morning, I'm going to try to talk about a hypothetical situation that if a traditional Jew from, let's say, several centuries ago were to be parachuted into one of our services, a Reformed Jewish service using Mishkan Tefillah, what would that traditional Jew be able to understand, follow, recognize, etc.? And I'm looking at this from the positive perspective. We're not going to say, would this person be outraged, offended, the changes we've made? Of course, that goes without saying, and I'll mention some along the way. Let me begin with this sort of discussion. Some would say, let sleeping dogs just stay where they are. But what time do we have our services on Erev Shabbat? We've had some very serious debates about all of that. And in a way, we've resolved the issue by recording. And you can see, hear, participate in the service from your home at whatever time is convenient for you. And even when we get to the point where we are live streaming, we hope to archive the service. So if, let's say, we are live streaming at a time when you're having a special dinner, you can wait until after the dinner. These are modern things on two levels. First, the technology of being able to do it. And second, the openness of Reform and many conservative Jews to use electronic equipment on Shabbat, to have something recorded on Shabbat, however it's done, and to initiate something electronic on Shabbat. Timing in the traditional Jewish world was very important, especially with regard to Shabbat. And what time did the service take place? Our traditional Jew may not be happy with the time we're beginning the service because it could be sometime after sundown, significantly after sundown. Time is very important, and not just with Shabbat. I'm going to begin with a simple little example, talking about the realities of life, and then we're going to get into some things that are more significant, at least in my opinion. At the very beginning of the discussion in the section of the Talmud Brachot, it talks about, and Brachot means blessings, benedictions. It talks about saying the Shema in the evening. Later on, why do we say the Shema in the evening? Because it says, as I mentioned last time, in that section we call V'ahavta, and you shall speak these words when you lie down and when you rise up. When you lie down means the evening, not literally when you're lying down. And there's a service in the evening. Well, when in the evening? And what if you forget? Or what if the example that's given, you're out at a party, a reception, and what kind of reception that is? If you want to clean up the commentary, it says it's a nice wedding reception. This is during the week, all right. Or they're out drinking, which is another way of interpreting the words. And it's getting pretty late. Maybe it's too late. And the discussion is you're given extra time to get things done, but within a framework. Within a framework, there's flexibility. Now, our traditional Jew has arrived at Temple Beth Israel on Longboat Key, and maybe the timing isn't such a problem. But what would this person recognize? Now, I'm eliminating for the time being the issues that are radically different. Take, for example, that whole series of benedictions, prayers, blessings, which we say on Shabbat and on regular days. We praise God, Eloheinu, Velohei Avotenu, and I'm going to translate that in two ways. Our God, who is the God of Avotenu, our fathers, or you could say all our ancestors. It could be including male and female. But our prayer book is not comfortable with that and says the Imotenu and our female ancestors, the patriarchs and the matriarchs. It then goes on to say, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. But what about the matriarchs? What about the wives? And in our prayer book, they are mentioned, okay? Our traditional Jew would recognize the Avotenu, our fathers, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but would say, wait a minute, what's this doing here with regard to the matriarchs? But focusing on the positive, the idea that the patriarchs are mentioned and the rest of the paragraph sort of sounds familiar, might work. Now, in our prayers in Mishkan Tefillah, we are talking about God bringing redemption, Geula, not Goel, not a redeemer with a capital R, Messiah from a Jewish perspective. We've depersonalized it. We're speaking about the Messianic age. But our traditional Jew would recognize that a change had been made and would recognize what that change was, even if the traditional Jew didn't like a word of it, even if there was opposition to it, which we could clearly expect. Now, what comes next in the next section of this series of prayers? And again, I'm going to talk about the familiar and the non-familiar. Whatever you and I believe what happens to us after we die physically, is there something after death? Whatever we believe is not our topic today. We could do something about that at another time in another place, and I offer that option. But the traditional prayer book says, Mechaye Hametim, literally, who makes alive the dead. Whatever that means. Is this bodily? Is this spiritual? Is it spiritual and then bodily? Whatever is going to happen after death, stepping back for a moment, whoever wrote these prayers, this is pure speculation. Nobody went there and came back and gave a report. But the traditional prayer book says, makes alive the dead, as opposed to our saying, Mechaye Hakol, makes everything alive. Again, our traditional Jew would recognize what is going on and see specifically where there are changes. I want to give one other example, and this isn't from Mishkan Tefillah. This is from European Reform prayer books. If I were to show you a European Reform prayer book, and I'm talking about earlier time periods, not what we have in those Reform congregations that exist in Europe today, let's say 100+ years ago, if you picked it up, you would say it looked like a traditional prayer book. There's all the Hebrew on one side, and I'm focusing on Germany right now, and all the German on the other. If you didn't know the Hebrew, you would think it's an Orthodox prayer book. Many times I have had the opportunity, and wonderful opportunity, to go to big book sales. For example, the Brandeis book sales, which in many major cities in the United States, lovely Jewish families would donate their books to the Brandeis book sale, get a good tax write-off, and this would be a wonderful way of recycling books. People have wonderful things in their libraries. Some of the great treasures that I have, I acquired at book sales like that, especially way back when things were going for 10, 15, and 50 cents a piece. There would be table after table of prayer books. We clear out all the prayer books that our ancestors, our grandparents, our parents, we don't know one from the other. Now, sometimes people bring them over to the rabbi and say, hey, rabbi, do you want them? And yes, I do, because sometimes there are great things there. I'm looking through them. I can't buy everything. There isn't enough room in the car. How do I determine whether it is an Orthodox, a traditional prayer book, or a Reformed prayer book where the Reformed prayer book looks so much like the traditional prayer book, I have to know what to look for. Well, we all know that section that begins with the word Ritzay. Our choir members sing it so beautifully and so powerfully. We all love it. We ask God to be pleased with our form of worship. That is the Reformed Jewish way of saying it. In a traditional perspective, we're praying for the restoration of the fire offerings, the sacrifices in the Temple of Jerusalem, animal sacrifices. That was left out of practically every Reformed prayer book. And if you want to look for something very, very quickly, what's the key thing? That's what you look for. Now, I have to say, forgive me, you have to know the Hebrew to know what to look for, and you have to know where it appears in the service to know where to find it. But a traditional Jew who would come to Temple Beth Israel of Longboat Key and hear one of our choir members singing Ritzay, that individual, we're not talking about the beauty of the music now, we're talking about the words, would say, "You've got it all wrong." Or, "I've never heard of it that before." Or, "No, this is not right." Now, leaving out the negative, there is the positive. It's in the right sequence. This is the way it's supposed to be. Backtrack history. There are certain things we're supposed to do in the service. We have printed books. Now, I know I'm dating myself. Some people sit there with their service, it's on their tablet. We've had printed books for some time, but before we had a prayer book in everybody's hand, the leader of the service, the Chazan, would repeat the Amidah, what we call the Tefillah, and in the right order, but there was flexibility in what words were said. We pray for health, happiness, and success. You say it your way, I say it my way. Our traditional Jew from, let's say, 500 years ago would not be aware of that variation. A couple of thousand, not quite a couple of thousand, say 1,500 years ago, yes, there'd be an awareness that the Jews of Babylonia did it this way and the Jews of Egypt did it that way. But I guess what I'm trying to say is there is a continuity and there is something we can all recognize. Now, you've got to do something in order to appreciate this. You have to know the Hebrew of the prayer book. And even if you go, here's how you do it. I used to tell this to the religious school kids constantly. You have to come to services. When you're at the service, don't just sit there and stare when we get to the Hebrew part. Follow along in the book with your eyes, listen with your ears, and almost try to mouth it out yourself. Before you know it, you have practically everything memorized, even if you don't quite understand it. Now, if I've given this example, I have never been to Hungary, but there are some beautiful synagogues in Budapest. And if I were to go to a synagogue service there, I don't understand a word of Hungarian. How could I follow the service if not in the Hebrew? And I wouldn't have any problem whatsoever because the Hebrew is a Hebrew I understand and recognize. As a Reformed Jew, okay, I'm trying to remember in what order I learned this, that, or the other as a kid. I'm trying to recollect a lot of this because we're putting some of this in our Jewish journey pieces in our temple bulletin. And then I'm going to do a session on one of our cocktail party hours on this. I remember as a little kid, how little, I'm not sure, in a traditional service in a modern Orthodox synagogue, my paternal grandfather's synagogue, looking in the Siddur, not just staring, and looking for words or sections that I could recognize. If you know or are familiar with all the Hebrew in Mishkan Tefillah for an Erev Shabbat service, and you work hard and you pay attention in a traditional service, there'll be a lot. Oh, you'll say, I don't know what that is. That's okay. But there'll be some things that you will know. You sang Ein Keloheinu and Adon Olam once or twice in your life, you'd hear the words. Now, it goes both directions. It is very easy for a traditional Jew to come to a Reformed Jewish service and say, this is all wrong, because from a traditional perspective, there is a right and a wrong. From a Reformed Jewish perspective, there's such flexibility, it is unbelievable. Mishkan Tefillah, I think more so Mishkan HaNefesh, then that's our high holiday prayer book, given the opportunity to be creative, to say the same thing differently, or to respond to needs that maybe haven't been responded to properly through the ages. We can have different readings and different opportunities to say things. There's going to be a new Haggadah published with different readings and new readings. I can't wait to see them. I may not like them. That's my choice, okay? As there are things in Mishkan Tefillah, even in Gates of Prayer, that I do not prefer to read at all. And it's supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be that it meets the needs of this person in this service and that person in that service. But we are not inventing our service out of midair. We have a structure. And I would be willing, if we were meeting in person, I'd have handouts right now. And I guess we could have these available, and you just do the right click and see them and so forth. The structure of the service. If you don't know what the structure is, it's like going to a football game and you have no idea what's going on. You have to have some sort of sense. It's not just a bunch of people running in different directions on a field. The structure tells you something, and we have sort of followed a lot of the traditional structure. And the traditional structure is absolutely fascinating. Within that traditional structure, there is variation. Now, I'm going to give you another example which may have an ounce of humor in it. We developed in the Middle Ages the custom of having the Kiddush as part of the Friday evening service. It wasn't always that way. The Friday evening, the evening Shabbat Kiddush. In the morning, the words are different. For the holidays, the festivals, and the high holidays, different. It was done in such a way that the Kiddush was considered so important. If you were a traveler and you didn't have a home to go back to after the service, you would be able to participate in the Kiddush. Now, whatever is going on with the Kiddush, this is a separate topic again. We're not blessing the wine. We are praising God first for creating the fruit of the vine, and then Mekadesh HaShabbat, who sanctifies the Sabbath. Now, where do we do the Kiddush in the service? Think of your experiences. In Mishkan Tefillah, it's on page 5, right after the candle blessing. The idea that it's right at the beginning of the service, and in some congregations, a family is brought up. The mother of the family with the daughters, they do the candle blessing, and the father and the sons do the Kiddush. Maybe we could reverse the order. The father could do the candle blessing and the mother could do the Kiddush. I'm open to that. If you're at home on Erev Shabbat and your Shabbat dinner and there isn't a woman in the family, the man does the candle blessing. It's a woman's honor. It's set aside for the woman, but if there isn't, the man does it, okay? That's option number 1. Option number 3, I'll get to 2 in a minute, is what we do at TBI, and that is right at the end of the service. And I think the idea is combine that with whatever we go right into our Oneg Shabbat, which all of us have really, really missed. Don't think I haven't. Where we're essentially pretending we're beginning our Shabbat meal, Kiddush, Hamotzi, food, and so forth. In many traditional congregations, the way it's done and the way it's set up in the prayer book is just before Aleinu. I almost wanted to say after the sermon, but even if there isn't a sermon, just before Aleinu. There isn't a strict rule on this, but a lot of customs are such that if you change it, everything is all wrong. I remember, and this is many, many years ago, attending a service at a Reformed congregation in Cincinnati, And at that congregation, the Kiddush was done after the sermon. But the people sitting behind me, who couldn't shut up for a minute during the whole service, expected the Kiddush to be right after the candle blessing. And they couldn't stop griping. What's the matter? They left out the Kiddush. Boy, the rabbi must be stupid. He doesn't know you're supposed to put a Kiddush there. You get comments like that. But at least they knew. And maybe they were traditional, and maybe they weren't, or maybe they just couldn't shut up for a second. They knew there was supposed to be a Kiddush. So if we know our stuff, however much or however little, and we go to a traditional synagogue and we don't really follow it well, keep our eyes and ears open to what's going on, and you'll recognize things. And in the other direction, if a traditional Jew from centuries ago, or let's say somebody who is unfamiliar with Reformed Jewish life and says, I'm so curious, I want to see what you guys do at a service, a lot would be recognized. Well, I know I've opened up so many questions, it's unbelievable. We can discuss in a few minutes. I'm going to pause in about a minute or so. I want to say I have enjoyed doing this month's series, and look for emails regarding what we're going to be doing next month. We will be doing 3 weeks of Tuesday morning classes. We will not do classes on the 4th Tuesday because that evening we're trying to do, and I'm saying trying to do, a community Thanksgiving service, social distancing, etc. I'm discouraging many of our members from attending because it's not worth the risk. I had to compromise. I would have preferred no one in the congregation, but the other religious organizations on Longboat Key felt very strongly. However, we are going to record it. It will be available the way our services are now. We again will miss out one of the parts that I have enjoyed more than anything else, the socializing afterwards. There's a nice couple that are on Longboat Key that I knew back in Sharon, Pennsylvania. They're not Jewish, but they get together with me once a year at the community Thanksgiving service, and I'll miss the good food. So give us a second or so, and then we are going to begin our discussion. Thank you for joining us.